Fossils, a record of animals that used to exist on Earth. Not only do they tell us how species have changed over time, but they can also tell us when those changes may have occurred. Today we're going to talk about further evidence for evolution. So since Charles Darwin published On the Origin of the Species, there's been a significant amount of evidence collected to support his theories. So this evidence has been contributed by biologists, geologists, geographers, and paleontologists. So when we're looking at types of evidence that supports evolution, one of them is fossils. So fossils are formed within sedimentary rock where an organism has died and has been buried by a layer of sediment and become fossilized. So all the carbon has been replaced by minerals in the bones. So the layer in which a fossil is found is often indicative of the particular age of that specimen. So all fossils of a certain area will be found in a certain layer of sedimentary rock. Fossils of a different era will be found in a different layer of sedimentary rock. So this allows us to see the relative age of organisms because organisms that are found much more close to the surface are more recent organisms. They're more closely related to modern species than organisms found in older layers. And it tells us that not all organisms appeared at the same time. So chronologically, the deeper we go, the older we get. And this also shows us that different species evolved at different times. So the oldest fossils that we find are aquatic fish, moving to amphibians, then reptiles, then birds. And the last type of organisms to evolve were mammals. In the fossil record, we can also see transitional fossils. So whether or not there are apparent gaps in the fossil record due to the availability of fossils at the time for us to discover, transitional fossils can be found that fills in the gaps and links different species together, like the Archaeopteryx, which is a feathered dinosaur. Another type of evidence of evolution is patterns of distribution. So this studies biology and geography together, and it's where the past and present geographical distribution of organisms. So many of these observations were used by Wallace and Darwin were based on biogeography, so how organisms were similar maybe in South America as in Africa. So we might find similar animals on different continents. So the panther, for example, in South Africa, and the jaguar, South America, and the jaguar in Africa. Similar rock structures are found on different continents in similar locations. And dinosaur fossils can be found in different continents, such as Mongolia and Alberta. There'll be similar fossils found in both those locations. Another type of evidence for evolution is the anatomy of different organisms. So, closely related organisms have homologous structures, so structures that have the same origin and general element but different functions. So, if we look at the human hand and the cat hand, we can see that we have a similar bone structure with one upper bone, two lower bones, and the same amount of bones in the hand. Compared to a whale arm bone as well has the one upper bone, the two lower bones, and the similar amount of bones in the hand. And we're all mammals with forearm structures. Birds have a slightly different one, and bats, even though they are mammals, they have very long finger bones, similar structure, very different function than that of a cat or a whale, but we see the same general structure, showing the process that evolution has gone to create that structure. So homologous structures will point to a common ancestor because at one point that adaptation of the one bone, the two bones, and then the hand structure was beneficial. Now, these variations in the structure over time became adapted to a variety of uses. So a whale for swimming, a cat for catching birds, and a human hand for holding a pencil, and a bat for flying, but we still see the same general structure. So analogous structures are those with a similar function but different origins. So this would be the similarity of a fish fin with a whale flipper or a shark fin. Now, these have a similar function to move an organism through the water, but they don't lend to evidence to evolution because of the very different structure that those organs take. Another piece of evidence for evolution is embryology. So most vertebrate embryos are similar to each other at one point in their development. So if we look across the top row, we can see a lizard, a tortoise, a pig, and a human, and you can easily see similarities in that development. Now, the middle column or the middle row is a human embryo at about 8 to 9 weeks development, and we still see a lot of similarity. But by the bottom, it is very different. We can see similarities between the lizard and the tortoise in the bottom because, again, they're going to be much more similar species than the tortoise and the human, or even the pig and the human. But we do see some similarities in the pig and the human if we look at more at eye placement, at arm placement, at hind leg placement. So now, again, this points to a common ancestor because we have similarities in embryology. This process of development obviously was successful and then got passed on to all the descendants. Molecular biology is another piece of evidence for evolution because we can trace relationships using DNA. So we've learned that some traits are shared by all organisms because we see this in the DNA. One of the most interesting things is mitochondrial DNA. So mitochondrial DNA is the DNA in your mitochondria, and every individual has the relatively exact same mitochondrial DNA as their mother. So all of my mitochondrial DNA is the same as my mother's mitochondrial DNA, which is the same as her mother's mitochondrial DNA. And we can see how long evolution was, or how long a time was between two different samples of mitochondrial DNA by how many variations there is within that, because there's a certain amount of variation expected within a certain amount of generations. So we can see how many generations occurred between two different samples. So some of the similarities we see between all living species are in cell design. So the organelles that are there, the cell wall, and the nucleus. So all eukaryotic cells have a nucleus, have some sort of cell wall or cell membrane, and have a similar set of organelles. Proteins. So all of life is made from the same 20 amino acids. No matter if it's skin, hair, organs, fish mucus, scales, teeth, all from the same 20 amino acids. And when we look at genetic material, it's the same 4 nucleic acids that make up all the DNA in all the living organisms. So when Charles Darwin proposed his theory of evolution, very little was understood regarding genetics. But we now know the following. We know that species pass on their traits to offspring using genetic material, so our DNA, and we know that the genetic material can change randomly, mutations leading to a variation in traits. Now, some of these mutations are beneficial, some are non-beneficial, and some are neutral, where they don't cause any positive or negative effects on a species or an individual's likeliness to survive and pass on their traits. Thanks for listening. Bye.
If you enjoyed this video, check out our website, online.plrd.ab.ca, and visit us on Facebook, Prairieland Online Academy. You can find out all that's going on with Prairieland Online Academy.